Long Take Review, where 4 college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Subchakchai Bankard, and I'm here with 2 creatures just trying to survive. First, don't get between him and his collection. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
You're stealing Greg's bits. That's what you're doing.
I mean, he'll have a different spin.
That's true. That's fair. I'm doing great. Thank you. And he's the only one I trust to steer this boat. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I'm good, Jen. How are you doing?
I believe in him.
I don't know if my mic can pick up my cat hisses, but that was my best attempt.
Yeah, we'll see when I go back and edit it.
I almost sent a ridiculous text earlier to PT to be like, which animal are you going to do? Because like I can woof, but will you meow or do I have to learn a lemur noise?
I love it. So listeners, if it was not already apparent, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Flow, which is now streaming on Max. So this is an animated film from Latvia that really has made a splash this award season because it was made by very few people on a very small budget using an open source software. And it has really kind of charmed a lot of people. It's gotten nominations in both international feature and in animated feature.
And don't forget Golden Globe nominee for best foreign language film, because it cracks me up because there's no language in this film. So according to the Golden Globes, our international Hollywood foreign press, cat speech is a foreign language.
Right. They're just trying to be inclusive, Greg. Come on. How dare you have such a narrow-minded view of what language is. Anyway, so if you are listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. I don't know how much, well, there are some spoilers, I guess. I can say in spoiler mode what my kids thought were spoilers because we did watch this twice. And with my mom who hadn't seen it. And so they spoiled a bunch of things for her. So we can talk about that later. But PT, if listeners want to swim after us after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If you enjoy curling up in the middle of your bed and taking a nap listening to the Long Take Review, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Overcast, YouTube, and many more. Wherever you get them, we'll be there. You can also follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at The Long Take Review, and also on Letterboxd. The account is at LTRpod, or you can search for the hashtag LTRpod to see what each of us individually has been watching. Jen?
All right, thanks, BT. So we'll start with the short take as always. What did everybody think about Flow? And you can use English to answer now. Don't have to answer in cat noises.
I loved Flow from almost the first frame, right? Like this movie starts out and you're just so quickly in competent filmmaking, and the character design is wonderful. I think a lot. I don't mean to word it that way. I mean, I do. I think a lot about Guillermo del Toro, and when he was making such a strong push for his Pinocchio movie, and about how animation should be taken seriously and not just kind of relegated to kids' domains. I thought a lot about him during this movie because, yes, kids can watch this movie, but like it's so transcendently like beautiful and just a wonderful experience to have never seen anything quite like this, and to sit down in the theater and just be swept away in a big flood of emotions. Really worked for me. I think, as I believe I said on air before, I went alone to this, but actually got seated next to a child who was pretty much exactly my son's age. So I was like, oh, dang, I should have brought my own kid to this instead of experiencing it with, I forget his name. He had like a Liam type name or something like that. But he and I, he got really into it and shared my armrest and looked at me like, isn't this awesome? And I'm like, yeah, buddy, it is awesome. So shout out to that kid. But this is a great time. And
is this the same kid who commented on the end credits? I feel like in a previous episode you talked about him.
The beginning credits. So when this begins, there are a lot of title cards for studios. I assume it's still the same on demand. And you know, there are like 4 or 5, And that's when this kid was like, man, how many people made this movie? And then it goes on for like 5 more. It's like 10 cards. And he really started looking around like, are you guys seeing this? Like, I can't believe this. Like, and he was right. He said what we're all thinking. But it was a very, very funny experience. But great movie. Really, I think this is one that might win over some animation skeptics, but I won't say anything further because that's recommendation algorithm. PT, what did you think?
What is the deal with all these title cards? Am I right, folks? Yeah, I thought this was really nice. This was, and I don't mean that as in a diminutive way. I mean, it was just a very enjoyable experience to sink into. It is its own world that is very, very close to and approximating ours, but has its own little interesting little lore that creeps in on the side. But at its heart is just a very simple story. I've have the tendency to go back and watch things from the history of cinema, and have dipped into a couple of silent movies in the last few months. Your Buster Keatons, and also a strange contrast with that is the drier Joan of Arc, the Passion of Joan of Arc. And this is a silent movie for the most part. I mean, there are sound effects and there are animal noises, but there's no dialogue and there's no story. I don't think that's a spoiler to say. Not there's no story. There's no it's all told visually, and the visual style is really unique and interesting and engaging. And as someone who has a love for cats, the main character is a cat. I'm just immediately just like, well, I would protect this animal with my life. So let's see what happens and make sure this cat is okay. And it's a great experience to watch this journey unfold. I'm trying to think of the best words to say it, to not reveal and too much about what happens. But yeah, it's a journey, and as you watch the journey, you really come to care about all the different beings that are connected here. Jen, what about you?
So in some ways, I was always going to like this movie. But the reason that I love because I'm weak to animals, and I feel like maybe this is dipping into recommendation algorithm. But if you at all care about animals, you have to see this movie. You will like it.
Also important to note, Latvia is in Eastern Europe and not Western Europe. So Jen, that also helps you a lot.
Really? What? Okay. So I feel like I now need a sound drop. Maybe it's like Riverdance or something, just to acknowledge, to be like, whenever you hear this noise, please know, like as a footnote, to be like, this is a dumb joke that everyone has decided we're sticking with about how Jen doesn't like Irish people, even though that is a total lie, just because she was slightly critical of Gladiator 2 with Paul Mescal. End of story. Okay, now you're caught up, listeners. I'm sorry that I had to do that, but I'm probably just fueling the desire to make these dumb jokes. Okay. What I was going to say about the movie that we're reviewing, and not about some random fallacy that we were trying to perpetuate, is that what made me love this movie, because I was always going to like this movie, as cute animals. It's got like Miyazaki-esque, like forced background, right? Like there's a lot of things in here that are just like, no pun intended, catnip for me. And the thing that made me love this movie was that it is able to both use actual realistic animal behavior. So the sounds that the animals make in this movie seem accurate to what they would make in real life. They're not cartoonish. Not that there's anything wrong with cartoonish animals, right? I love those too. And the cat acts like a cat. Like if you own a cat, you will recognize cat specific behaviors in the animation of this cat, right? So everything has like a realism to it. But then at the same time, by the end of the movie, you are attached to all these animals as if they are people, right? Like they develop a personality, they have conflicts with each other. Like there's all this stuff that happens as if there were humans speaking in dialogue with this movie. And that to me is the astounding thing about it, is that it's able to achieve such, I know the plot of the film is simple, but I think the storytelling it manages to achieve, considering it's a bunch of animals and no human language, is very deep.
I need a sound drop for this bit, like Riverdance is a hate crime. I'm just putting that out there. But not surprising, considering the source.
Well, I was trying to play into the okay.
I'm done. That's the last one.
All right, you're done?
That's the last one for tonight.
Okay. So we have started to creep into this a little bit because, when we get excited about a movie, I think we just start naturally talking about how to recommend it. But the recommendation algorithm is where we establish the audience of a film. Not every film is for everyone. So my big question is this a 4-quadrant movie? And, that we don't have to actually answer that question. But I think to me, what was great is I was able to watch this with my kids. They really loved it. I loved it. Everyone got something out of it. So I guess, would we just recommend this to everyone?
I would say I agree. I have not watched it with my kids. I know Antonio has watched it with his, and I plan to. It just keeps always getting pushed aside by something a little flashier to them, right? Kind of established IP. They're just big Hollywood kids just sucking up the IP. But I do think you're correct in that regard. The person I'm thinking of is like, in my life, this was my stepdad, who's like, what? Right? Like that kind of like, I don't have time and patience for this silliness. Cause it is at times there's real peril and suspense and tension at times, but it's also very meditative for long stretches. And I can see some people kind of checking out. It's obvious but correct, and you already said it, which is like, I think you have to like Miyazaki, and I think one potential frustration is the ambiguity here. There aren't a lot of answers in this film. You have to just kind of go with what happens, and that particular quality made me think a lot about Miyazaki, where you're just like, okay, there's marshmallow people now, and enjoy them, but don't ask questions about where they are and where they're going and what happens to them when they die, because that's not what the film is interested in. It's just interested in showing you these moments. And so if my older child, my son, doesn't like it, it might be that because he tends to want to puzzle out. And I once clocked him. We watched the first Captain America film, and he asked me more than 3 questions per minute for the runtime of that film. And it's because it's a childlike wonder and an inquisitive mind, and you want to reward that. But this is not a film that really encourages that kind of viewing. This is much more enjoy these characters, feel attached to them, watch what happens with them. So those are I'm almost inverting the recommendation algorithm to say those are the types of people who I think would not enjoy this, but I would recommend it to pretty much everybody else. And despite what I just said about my son, who I love very much, I will say this is a good thing to show kind of IP-soaked kids, to be like, this is what storytelling can also be. And you don't need something where you can run to Target and buy 5 Flow toys and get the boat play set with the opposable, I won't say the name of that animal or the other animal, but like it's so great to show kids something that doesn't have all of that kind of culture. There are no Flow Happy Meals. There are no Flow T-shirts. And, having just clicked away from an internet story about how Universal Studios is already planning Wicked Land and Shiz University you can go to, like, it's really refreshing to not be in that world for a time. So that's my recommendation.
2 reactions to Greg's thing real quick. One, would buy, I think, at least some of those Flow toys. So it's good that they don't exist, but also as soon as you said that, I was like, well, now wait a minute. If they came as a set, then actually. And second, I'm curious, was how often when he was asking 3 questions a minute, how often was the question, why are there no action scenes in this movie about the first Captain America? But whatever, that's a conversation for
he was more questioning, like, didn't Joe Johnston work these issues out in The Rocketeer? Why are we reliving this?
Great movie. And I like the first Captain America movie, but every time there's going to be an action scene, it becomes a montage instead of an actual scene. Anyway, that's my main memory of that movie. For this movie, I would say that, my instinct is like Greg was saying, it's like, well, people who maybe question whether they can engage with animation, although my real life data set of 1 for that was not successful because I could not get Jasmine to watch this movie. Jasmine was like, nah, it's okay.
You own a black cat.
Correct.
Like,
it's an animated movie. She doesn't care.
Oh.
She's not interested. There might have been some mitigating factors when this movie came on Max. Our cat had to go to the doctor to get something checked out. It ended up being fine, but there was a little bit of tension. So I think maybe the idea of a cat in peril was not going to be enjoyable for like a Friday night viewing on the day this dropped. So this was watched after Jasmine went to bed. But what I will say is, one of the things that to again, in a different way than Greg sort of judo reversed the task of this section. One of the complaints I've seen people say about this movie is because of the animation style, and also most of the animation style, but also maybe the sort of tenor of the events. They're like, it's just a video game cutscene. Like, it just kind of looks like a game, and I'm just waiting to take over, but I never get to do that. But I think that there is a style of game playing which is not action oriented. That's kind of like you just soak into a world and you do puzzles. I saw a couple people refer to Myst, the old series Myst, while as relating to the experience of watching this movie, and I think that like, if that's something that's in you, that's something where you're like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed that, I found that relaxing, then I think this could be a very good experience for them. In addition to, of course, if you love animals, if you love animation, if you just want to see a story told in a different way, if you have any connection to silent movies, that this is carrying that legacy forward of telling a story just with visuals and motion. That's something that I think also people could connect with. My only, anti-recommendation is it's not going to be a good movie for a 2-screen experience, similar to movies we've reviewed recently where we have said that, where it's like, but you need to pay attention to what's happening because, for the other movies, it's different reasons. For this one, it's all visual. There's just, you got to see what's happening to follow along, even if it is taking its time occasionally. So, put the phone down, like lock in and relax and unwind, and try to not have your brain sort of running at high speeds at all time, with the fan whirring the way it always does.
I guess I hadn't thought about, because my kids love this movie, that I haven't managed, unlike Greg, I haven't managed to hook them with IP, but the only success I've had as a parent is that I've raised them on Miyazaki. Like when my son was a baby and like he would wake up too early in the morning, everyone else in my house is asleep, I would bring him actually to this very spot where I'm sitting, and I put on Totoro, and that was his like stay calm and quiet until everyone else wakes up activity. And so if I put a Miyazaki movie on, they will watch it. Like, they will have the patience for it, and they like that kind of surrealism of like, oh, cute, weird creatures walking around. Like, I mean, they are my kids after all, so I guess that's not surprising. But you know what I mean? So like, I hadn't thought that like maybe not every kid would be immediately on board with this movie, like they were. So that's a really good point. But worth trying, like Greg said, for sure. I think. I mean, they were just really invested in what the animals were doing. They were like, and in general in their survival, right? They were like, they were trying to coach them. It was very cute. Like, you gotta go get that fish. Like, you gotta, there's a lot of that, which I guess I could discuss more in spoiler mode if we need me to, but maybe that is the sign that we need to go into spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Flow, it is available to stream on Max. It's also available to rent or buy at home. All right. So here's your last chance. Here's the spoiler warning. All right, Greg, you can finally say what all the animals are. I know you're being very good about that.
So this is a throwback to the LTRs where it was the 100th episode that we were asked to identify a film that we connected with somebody else's taste. And this is the one I connected with Jen's taste because I saw it, knowing the poster, I knew there was a cat. And so I'm sitting watching the cat, and then the capybara shows up. I'm like, what? Like, Jen's going to lose her mind. There's a capybara in this?
I did.
And then,
mind.
like a few minutes later, some lemurs show up, which I don't essentially tie to you, Jen. I might have gone red panda instead of lemur if we were really trying to go for the Jen demographics. But it's like, so fun. And then this, my household within the last year and a half now, I guess, became dog owners, and like there's really great dogs in here. And so everything you said about the cat is true for all those animals, right? Like you really feel like these animators understood who these animals were and what behaviors they have. So it's really great. And then the large stork like birds. I have a childhood fear of large birds because I used to get chased by a rooster. We'll go into another time. And so like I don't personally like the large birds, but like, you know, they are kind of unique. They're a little crane-ish. I don't know the exact species
So I
that we're
think
doing.
they're called secretary birds.
That's what I just saw as well. They are
Okay.
secretary birds.
Yeah.
Oh, they're cute. Sorry, I just
I believe when you say another time, Greg, I believe we did get into it a little bit in the Boy and the Heron review.
Oh, that's right.
Similarly, had an issue, with the heron.
Yeah. No big
I
birds.
know lots of people who have the issue, but more because of geese. That's their traumatic childhood moment is like they thought geese were cool, and then turns out geese are very not cool. And we'll come after you if you antagonize
see
them.
my hissing at the beginning of the episode for a goose impression. People don't know they have that register too. Yeah, and like again, I think why I'm happy to be here in spoiler mode is because I saw this so much earlier than the rest of you. I'm like, I can't say all those different animals and all those surprises because it's really wonderful when they all kind of join the crew. And like, for me, I don't know, they're all great. Your opening quote for PT alluded to the fact the lemur is a collector, and like a major plot point is that one of his collectibles gets broken. And I was like, oh,
it's tragic.
I've been there, man. And so it really felt like so wonderful to have, again, no rules about ecosystem and why these animals would be together, but it's like a bunch of the internet's favorite animals, right? I guess we'd need a baby hippo if you made that in this year now, or a pygmy hippo or whatever. But
sure.
I was going to say the capybara in particular. I don't know if you know this. This might just be my kids' shopping habits, but the capybara right now is the hot ticket animal. It's like
lots
the
of
thing that you buy notebooks and pens and stuffed animals. And like, it's especially capybaras with like fruit on their head. I don't know what that's about. So like they were immediately sold. They probably would have enjoyed the movie anyway. But when the capybara showed up, that was like, Mom, you are the best mom ever for finding this movie with a capybara in it.
Is there something that has triggered the capybara trend? Like, okay, there's no
I don't know if there's a
cartoon
meme or what it is.
This just happens in kids stuff. Jen, you probably experienced this when your kids were born. Like the year my son was born, everything was foxes, just everything. And then when my daughter was born, it was, I think owls had happened in between, and we were more towards like jungle animals. And it's like there's a secret cabal somewhere. I'm picturing the conclave people, and 2 votes for capybaras, 1 vote for Tedesco. Still, why him? And so it just happens, and they all kind of sync up. And I agree, it is capybaras right now. Every bookstore I've been at lately, the like nice bookstores with the little corner of like high end stuffed animals, there's always like 3 capybaras there, desperately for
suspect
purchase.
It's also Japan, not Japan's fault, but Japan, I think, has started that they're the new cafes. So like if you have never been to Japan, a popular thing, which may or may not, I have participated in, but may or may not be ethically questionable in some cases, is the cafe where they just have an animal that you can hang out with. So like cat cafes, right? Those are the ones that have actually made it to the US, I think, in some ways, but under the guise of like, come adopt one of these cats that you hang out with, right? But the one I went to when I was in Japan many years ago was an owl cafe where you come in, you pay a ticket price, and then you go in, and then you have an hour to just hang out with like 12 owls. But so now the newest ones that have opened recently are capybaras for whatever reason.
Instead of a conclave, though, I prefer to think it's Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada, and she has a whole speech about like, you thought you chose capybaras, you don't realize there's a whole industry, and there's a just a fashion industry, but for animals and for kids, and it's actually Meryl Streep as a child.
So the thing that I wanted to really ask about in spoiler mode is there's a kind of an element of, okay, well, I'll just come out and ask it. The bird that Greg is sort of afraid of, like, what happens to him? Because on the one hand, it's kind of obvious, I think, maybe according to my kids, it was kind of obvious. They're like, didn't he die, Mom? Like, but I feel like the surrealism and the kind of fantasy of it, where he and the cat are both like lifting up into the sky, and then the bird goes and the cat stays. Like, is that just all a metaphor for the cat surviving and the bird dying, or is like there's something more going on? And I'm actually asking this for an answer. Like, I'm conflicted about it.
I just thought of it as the bird ascending, like, which you could think of as just it dying, and it's time for it to die. But the cat, it's like, no, it's not your time yet. So it sort of gets, into the vortex or whatever, and it's sucked up off the ground, but is allowed to stay. I guess I didn't think it was that literal. There is the interesting thing of like its wing is hurt and then it's better right before it gets taken away. So does that mean something? Is that sort of like, is that more of an indication that it's death as opposed to just some mystical thing? But I think it's interesting world building that like I like not knowing whether it's like, no, there's a way to be elevated into another plane of existence or whatever, another level out into the world that is, not the same as someone that's just dying. Also potentially ties it even more into feeling like a video game where it's just like you've completed the level and now you get to move on into the light, but the cat doesn't, and the cat has to stay.
Well, and the larger question about like what is this world and what is the history here? Why are there no humans? That's all what I alluded to. And it's like the film doesn't care, and I think that's something quite beautiful here. Is that modern storytelling avoids ambiguity, and I have this talk with students all the time because we'll read a short piece of writing. They'll be like, but what happened? Like, what is the truth? And it's like, no, there's beauty in the ambiguity and not being able to quite put your finger on it. And I think that leads to, for some people, the bird did die. And for other people, it ascended. And, I like the interpretation that the cat still had work to do, right? Because the cat goes on to do something heroic after when he saves the dogs from the boat, right? They're about to fall into a chasm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I like those interpretations, but I also just like that the film isn't concerned with it. Right. And that to me is kind of the beauty of letting you meditate, letting you kind of marinate in this world for a little while. I'm just going to keep finding weird metaphors, letting you marinate in this world and then not making it about answers. Right. And I mean, I don't like the bird. The bird is my least favorite for reasons I've implied already in this episode. But I do like, to me, there's something about how that is the focal point of the journey. I guess I'm reversing Laszlo Toth, right? That it was the journey, not the destination, because the destination was ultimately not for the cat. So this kind of, it's too much to say that was the quest and that's what they were going to, but all the momentum is going in that direction. And then it's like you return after that, right? We go back on those the steps we've been through, and then the floods recede. So I like that the action unfolds that way, and I like that we don't exactly know why.
And the thing that we do know is the relationships between the characters and how the bird had helped the cat a couple of times. And so the cat being there and going through the sort of climbing the winding stairs. I don't know if it was really a maze, but at least getting to this point. I don't know if the cat needed to be there. I assume the cat's called Flo. So we'll just call the cat Flo. Flo is there if that was necessary for the bird, but it was like they were there together. Like they were, that's as they had helped each other out. So too did the cat help the bird achieve whatever it is the bird achieves there, whether that's a smooth passage to death or an actual ascending into some different world. I don't know, but I really appreciate that Jen's kids are just like, he died. The bird's dead.
He dead, Mom. He dead.
That was one of the spoilers they dropped on my mom when she watched it with us the second time, and she hadn't seen it before, because she immediately was like, are these animals going to die? And I had to be like, no. I kept having to update my caveat. I was like, no domesticated animals on the boat die. You know what I mean? Like I had to at first I was like, no animals in this movie die. And then immediately my son is like, but what about the whale? And I was like, oh, right. Okay, so no animals on this boat die. And then my daughter was like, what about the bird? And I was like,
I feel like that just shows, Jen, you did not watch through the credits. At the end of the credits is the whale swimming in the water again. So the whale survives.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
What? You don't see the whale die. The whale is still breathing. And the end of the credits is you're on the horizon of the water, and there's just the whale jumps up in the distance in front of the sun, and that's the end.
All right, we got to shut down this recording right now. I got to go watch this. Like, what? I did not know that. But
well, all the fish that get eaten die. That does happen.
I finally stopped scrolling to see if there are post-credit scenes. Thanks, Marvel. And this is what I get. The one time I don't do that. Oh, man.
It's because Max didn't pop up with what's the next thing you want to watch. I was like, there must be something.
Well, I didn't watch it on Max. I bought it.
Well, whose fault is that?
So then it wasn't like it. I turned. Wow, breaking news. I just have to process this in real time.
Well, but to the larger question, the whale was also kind of the biggest touch of fantasy, right? Like that is not an earthbound whale. I believe it's from the planet Pandora. This is what it says. Yes. And we learn the way of the water.
It does look a lot like that.
Fire and ash. Sorry. We're not. Okay.
So wait,
we're not drafting yet. Craig,
this kind of changes everything because for me, kind of what I kind of liked about the movie was that, yes, my kids were like, this is so fun. And then they were devastated at the end because the whale did not survive. But I feel like
go wake them up. Kids, get out of bed. I got some news. Uncle PT changed everything.
Yeah. He made
it all watch better. The credits. You got to go back.
But I feel like if you end on the whale dying, I feel like the message about, and this is a good segue into the thesis, please. Though there was more I wanted to talk about. I just don't remember now because you blew my mind. That the message of the kind of about natural disaster, environmentalism, and kind of like, we don't know the who, what, when, where, but clearly something caused this to happen. But it's less about, like Greg said, it's less about finding the answers about the who, what, when, where, why, and more about just dealing with the aftermath and the consequences of whatever it was, right? So like the fact that the water comes and creates this flood and they have to change the way that they're doing everything in their lives to adapt to it and to survive. And then I thought it was really beautiful that the reverse also has that kind of devastating consequence because the whale suddenly is like unable, it's beached on the land and there's nothing it really could have done about that, right? Like how would it have known? There was no way to have predicted, especially for those animals, like, or humans for that matter, that like, oh, the water's going to rise for whatever reason and then it's going to go back, recede for whatever reason. And so and especially when that was going to happen. So I actually thought that was really poignant because it's so tragic that like, oh, you thought they all survived, but then there was yet another sort of natural disaster consequence that they had to work around. So I don't know.
Yeah. So the things that are good or helpful for some people are what is endangering to others.
Right.
Because there's an ebb and a flow.
A flow. So, I mean, I guess let's dip into thesis, please. If I had other stuff I remembered I wanted to cover earlier, I'll go back to it.
Is it thesis, please, or rhetorical situation?
You do rhetorical situation because I want to throw your question at you.
Okay. So we'll go into rhetorical situation, a segment in which we analyze a film through the lens of our academic experience. All right, so all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. What do you got for me?
Well, so I think we've been dancing around this kind of question that is how allegorical is this film? And I thought so far in our conversation when PT noted that when there's so much ambiguity, all you're left with is the like relationships between the characters. And what you were just explaining, Jen, about how we, there's a cost to that survival perhaps and either direction. So I want to throw your own question at you and really have you answer it first because you never get to do that of how much of this you read as an allegory allegory. And because we don't acknowledge it enough, you're the smartest one on the podcast. Just define allegory for people who maybe aren't familiar with that term fully.
Sure.
Professor.
So, allegory is any story where the text, meaning the plot, the actual thing that is happening, is actually a stand-in for something happening out extra textually, meaning like, you know, the most classic example, at least from my literary upbringing, was the Lord of the Rings. Everyone kept saying, well, Tolkien was in World War I in the trenches, so clearly this is his, and everything in here is an allegory about post-industrial Britain and the war and how bad that was, and right, and so that's a extra textual valence that we bring to the interpretation of that, to say like, oh, he was meaning this was about hobbits and elves and orcs, but really he was talking about our world. And so I would say, to answer your question, Greg, like, this is there are many ways in which this is very allegorical, because of what I said in my way back in my short take, where the animals are really acting purely on instinct very clearly, because the way they're animated and the way they sound and the way they communicate, right? Like, there are many scenes where you're like, oh yeah, like if a dog met a cat in the wild and then a rabbit ran by, this is clearly what they would do. They would fight over the rabbit, or like the dog would be all like, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? I want to play. And the cat would be like, get out of my face, please. Right. That they would kind of have conflict based on just the instincts of them being strangers to each other and not knowing each other and stuff like that in the wild. Right. It's actually where like the Wild Robots themes intersect with this a lot, of like survival instincts are the equivalent of robot programming, right? I think that's very much at play here. Like, that it's like, oh, the animals are just reacting to each other as they would in the wild. But at the same time, the way that the story evolves in terms of their relationship to each other when they're kind of trapped together on this boat and trying to survive together, I do feel like the idea that like we can transcend our survival instincts to kind of compete with each other, and we can ignore kind of the natural ecology and the food chain and all that kind of stuff, right? That, and actually kind of work together for a common cause. And to me, since real animals in real life are less likely to do that last part, that to me seems to really be the, like, when natural disaster strikes, when the world is on fire, you know, people should help each other as opposed to just be kind of out for themselves, right? For their own survival. And we're certainly not short of natural disasters to have a real world frame of reference for that. As someone who lives in Southern California, like, can't stop thinking about wildfires. Like, my daughter was still just asking me about fires yesterday. So it's very much a thing that is on all of our minds. But yeah.
I think that's incredibly well said, and that's why we pay you the big bucks to be on our podcast. And I think, just to pick up on that last piece, I think the obvious symbolism here feels like climate change. And I think the kind of basic premise of this is just going to sweep us all away and be what our whole lives become about, the way the flood becomes totally changes the existence of these animals, is right. It wasn't lost on me that the cat's before life is like a cozy little cottage, and in the part of the country I live in that is not hugely affected by wildfires and other kind of immediate climate change effects. That's like part of the attitude up here. It's like, I'll just buy a cabin in Maine and I'll just go hang out in the cabin and it will be cool. And I like this idea that we are dealing with forces beyond this. There is a common thread across a lot of nominees this year. I don't know when we talked about I'm Still Here. Maybe it was within the last hour. And one of the things, this kind of rising tide of extremism and fascism that the whole world is seeing, to me, is exactly in line with flow, right? I mean, we group these together on our recording night for other reasons, but they actually kind of resonate with each other, that like there's this way in which you think it's not me those people aren't my problems, right? The dogs on a little stone island are just the Brazilian military police from I'm Still Here, in it, right? Like, so there is this way in which I think the resounding message from our creative communities, and I mean, a lot of the shorts deal with this, and certainly the documentary No Other Land is kind of pulling on these threads. Seed of the Sacred Fig, like this is clearly just in the mix of what our culture is concerned about. And I think the creative community is really saying that, you know, we're not going to make it if we don't start figuring out how to work together. And I think you can view that politically or racially, or, you know, fill in your category. If the folk singers can't work with the rock singers, like we just can't, like, so I just think it's like such a message present this year. And if I were to distill so many of the movies I've watched, I'd say this is what we need to be telling ourselves in our myths and our storytelling right now.
I think both of you have made really good points, and the only thing that I can add to that is the fact that the cat does have a nice little cottage to live in, but like it isn't in a, you know, sort of so fantastical, so Miyazaki-ish a world where it's like, but the cat like walks in the front door and like takes off a collar and hangs it up like a hat on a hook. Like the cat has to, you know, jumps up on the outside and goes in through a broken window to curl up on the middle of a bed to go to sleep. There were people in this world. It seems there's all indications there were people. Like the boat is not like a special made or thrown together capybara barge that exists. Capybarja, it would be called. But you know, it's a regular human boat that is existing here. So there is something to the fact that this is a post-human world, which is which, you know, it seems to indicate that not only is it a story about like we need to work together because otherwise there might be problems with you know, when we deal with natural disasters, but like there already were people who didn't work together and climate change wiped them all out, and now we only have, you know, formerly domesticated animals that are wild. There's, you know, the dogs are not like, you know, hounds that are usually out in the woods. It's like the main one's like a golden lab, which is, you know, probably from not that many generations removed from being made from hopefully a well-respected and well-maintained breeder somewhere. And, you know, it is this thing that hangs over the rest of the movie. And, you know, one of the things that I was wondering, I was like, are they going to do some sort of a reveal to be like, and they get somewhere and they're going to see something where it's like, whatever it might be, some sort of like breakdown of what happened. There's paintings on the wall, a fresco someone made, or even a video showing. And that's the first time you hear any human voices is, you know, the final news report from about something. And I'm glad they never did, because I think it does make everything that you were both saying about the actual animals and how they are working and the sort of lessons they learn from each other, I think really resonant.
And I think that's what makes it so powerful, that it's all animals and no people, but just the kind of the ghost of, or like the material remnants of people, the presence of people. Because I think when you watch these wild animals acting like wild animals, and then over time they gradually start to do things that are sort of against their natural instincts, according to us, right? Like where they're helping each other. And I mean, one of the most powerful scenes, I know Greg is not a huge fan of the bird, but one of the most powerful scenes is when the bird tries to give the fish to the cat. This is the only way I have to fight back, okay? Like when the bird tries to give the fish to the cat, all the other birds turn against him, right? Like that is obviously an allegory for insert desired world conflict, you know what I mean? Like of like a people being like, we can't, don't betray your kind, like you can't, like this is ours and that's theirs, and like you can't, never the twain shall meet, right?
Looking at each of the animals, they're all from different parts of the world. You know, part of, you know, a capybara is from South America. The secretary bird is mainland continent Africa. Lemur is endemic to Madagascar, the island off of Africa,
because they like to move it.
Correct.
Yeah, we know.
And
Continue.
I knew you were going to do that.
I mean,
Knew it.
golden labs and the house cat are sort of pets from around the world, I guess. But they don't seem to be, you wouldn't think necessarily like, oh, a house cat, that's from South Africa or South America or Africa. So I think that also plays into the idea of it's different it's different animals from different parts of the world working together in the same way that different people from different parts of the world should work together.
So that to me is very powerful because it seems so cruel and yet so familiar. So then eventually towards the end of the movie, to see them all working together to save the dogs that they didn't even like and the dogs that stole all of their food. I didn't forget that. Those dogs are the worst. Like, just came and didn't ask any questions and just
really
ate all
pushing
their
back
food.
against the idea they're all good boys. There are some bad boys in this movie.
Right, they're not all good doggos. Like, just the one is a good one. But also the movie does actually, to be fair, it does a good job of like showing that there isn't necessarily malice. They're just like, oh hey, there's food. Blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like it isn't. They aren't like. Because if this were a Disney animated film, for example, not to cast aspersions on Disney animated films, regular listeners will know how much I love those. But you know what I mean? Like if they were more humanoid animals, there would be a scene where one dog is like, step aside, like, what is this? Oh, this is our food now, right? Like they would be much more of like a kind of hammed up sort of villainy thing. But instead it's like, no, like they're dogs, they're hungry. They're not necessarily thinking about whose food this is, right? And so I think that's a very powerful thing for us to witness is both that on the one hand, but then, the animals genuinely trying to save each other. Like when the bird, I keep coming back to the bird. Sorry, Craig. Like when the bird swoops down and you think that because naturally a bird would be wanting to snatch an animal from the water to eat, right? But then it turns out he's trying to save the cat. So it's like, I don't know, that sort of bait and switch of natural but cruel animal behavior versus like altruism is a very powerful combination.
Oh, sorry. Lin-Manuel Miranda just called. He's got a parody song of "Eat It," which is the Dogs' new anthem. Step aside, I'm gonna eat your food. I think that's exactly right, and I think you're right to say, there are just different kinds of animation, and we're not necessarily denigrating those other kind of more childish forms. But I do think that this is the kind of product you get when you don't have a studio forcing it to try to be 4-quadrant. And when you aren't trying to, I was the one who teased before, but like when you're not trying to market the crap out of something. And, it's always shocking to me when a new kids movie comes out and my kids have looked at the like 4 different novelizations of it 2 months before it appears in theaters. And it's like, it doesn't need to be all that. It can be something smaller and something more special. And I think this film demonstrates that when you let creative people really kind of cook and get out of their way, they can create something more memorable and special in those regards.
All right. I'm really glad we got to squeeze this one in. I was worried that we were never going to get to it and that it would sort of fall through the cracks after the Oscars. So I'm really glad we made the time. Thank you both for being here. Greg, you're the busiest man at podcasting. Fill us in on what you've been up to lately and tell folks where they can find you.
Thanks, Jen. I have most recently been listening to the latest episode of Podcast Stardust, which is doing a retrospective for the 10th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith. And what? Who's this guest? Oh my goodness. It's renowned Irish hater Jen Subchakchai on a different Star Wars podcast. So all joking aside, Jen did an awesome job and she doesn't plug her own work nearly enough. So people should check it out. So the show is called Podcast Stardust. Every year they take one Star Wars film and they break it up into 12 pieces. And it's usually a film celebrating an anniversary. So this is the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, which is episode 3 of the Star Wars Skywalker saga. And Jen did an absolutely wonderful job talking through a whole bunch of really goofy scenes, including what she says every week when we record this show. hold on, we're smarter than this, but usually off mic. So I'm listening to that podcast and then logging a whole bunch of nonsense on Letterboxd. My name is Ion Cannon on that, EYEONCANON. Are you listening to me but wondering what my thoughts are on the entire Bridget Jones saga? Well, good news for you. That's Ion Cannon on Letterboxd. PT, who has also logged the first Bridget Jones, but you have a journey ahead of you, my friend. What's going on?
My friend, I have logged the 3 Bridget Jones movies that were out before this year. I've not watched the 4th one yet. You can go and find my reviews of 3/4 of the Bridget Jones saga. I will also say I did just finish that episode of Podcast Stardust. Jen did do an excellent job. I will second what Greg said. I will just add, I think the hold on, we're smarter than this is supposed to be, or in my mind has always been a line about the fall of the Jedi and how the Jedi have not realized what's happening around them. But that's a whole, they can invite me on their show if they want me to unpack that a little bit more. I've also recently listened to Greg, who, sold his Letterboxd a little bit, but didn't talk about all the things he did on 2 episodes of Coffee with Kenobi, where he and his Rebel Base Card co-host and two Coffee with Kenobi mainstays do a ranking of all the Disney Plus seasons. Which is something that I know we did at one point when we were talking about it, but there's been more seasons and there's more rankings, and they were mostly right, although some very glaring errors were made in the rankings, because of course we all know opinions can be wrong. For me, speaking of wrong opinions, you can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can find the show there as well at LTR Pod. You can find us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at The Long Take Review. You can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com, or you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're listening right now. You can just hit subscribe and get new updates from us. A lot of content coming from us soon, so why don't you subscribe so you will get it hot off the presses as soon as we get it out there. Jen, in addition to working on editing all that great stuff for our show, where can folks find you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the plugs and shout outs. And yeah, shout out to Dennis and Jay. They were amazing hosts. It was super fun to go on their show. And I was like, Greg, I'm asking you to plug your own stuff, not mine. So I'd say I appreciate it. But you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Unsurprisingly now that you're probably like, some of our listeners are probably like, why am I getting all this Star Wars at the end of my film podcast? But so it is. And you can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Subchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI.
Meow.
Aww. Wants to make a capybara noise. Oh, we didn't ask like what everybody would be if we were on the boat. I would be the capybara because he just is like chill and wants to nap and is like, can't we just all get along?
Yeah, that is pretty good. I mean, Greg and I would have to fight over the lemur because we both collect things.
Yeah, I really was torn in the opening line. I was like, this could go either way. I don't know.
So if I defer to Greg as the lemur, I would like to think I'm the golden retriever who's just being kind of trying to be friendly, but also trying to like, make everyone get along, and that's fine. But I also would be okay, even though it would make Greg mad, to just be the bird driving, which we did not really talk about, that the biggest, beyond the light in the sky or whatever, and the whale, that's kind of a fantastical thing. It's just that this big secretary bird knows how to, and all the animals just know how to deal with rudders.
I loved seeing his foot just on the rudder or whatever it is. What is that the name of I'm not ship shape. I don't know what the.
I think so.
Okay.
So does that make Antonio the cat?
I had originally, in my intro, put him as the bird. Because he's just keeping the ship going.
I just do know he doesn't like driving.
Oh, that's true.
So I think he gets to be the dog.
Sailing?
And I'll be there. Well, sailing, maybe he likes sailing. He needs to be.
Does he own boat shoes? I feel like he owns boat shoes.
Did he get to this late in the episode in order to hear this?
Guys. Antonio, they're running amok without you here. I can't control them. Like, help, please help.